Good morning. It is Friday, June the 4th, and this is The Drill. I'm Ron, your host, the only true conservative in the United States today, welcoming all the butchers, bakers, and candlestick makers. So this morning, where I'm going to read from the Daily Declaration for Spiritual Warfare, then we're going to have the Pledge of Allegiance, the Star-Spangled-Banner, then I'm going to be reading from a new book that I found called 10 Global Trends. And then I'm going to play a clip and comment on a clip from the John and Ken show. All that when I get back. Thank you. And let's see here. The Daily Declaration for Spiritual Warfare, June the 4th. The benefits of deliverance. My deliverance will bring you freedom and joy, because my deliverance, you will see my mighty miracles and will experience my supernatural breakthrough in your life. Praise me with all your heart, and do not forget all my benefits that come to you with my deliverance. I will forgive all your sins and heal all your diseases. I have redeemed your life from the pit. I am compassionate and gracious to you, slow to anger and abounding in love. As high as the heavens are above the earth, so great is my love for those who fear me. I will be with those who love me from everlasting to everlasting, and I will give my righteousness to your children's children if they will keep my covenants and remember to obey my precepts. Prayer declaration. Father, may your glory endure forever, and may you rejoice in the works of my hands. I will never forget all the benefits of your deliverance to me. I will trust in you, for you are my God. My times are in your hands. How great is your goodness, which you have stored up for those who fear you. You will hide me in the shelter of your presence and keep me safe in your dwelling place. Amen. And let's go ahead and get this set up. And so, let me see. We're going to go ahead now and do we're going to have the kids recite the Pledge of Allegiance and sing the Star-Spangled Banner. Thank you very much. And now the Star-Spangled Banner. And that's absolutely gorgeous. And I read from the daily prayers for spiritual warfare and play the Pledge of Allegiance to the Star-Spangled Banner to remind myself and you that what we're about here is deeper than just going into a voting booth and pulling a lever. and changing seats in the House of Representatives and the White House, that this is really all about glorifying God and glorifying our country and, in a manner of speaking, glorifying our children. Now, I'm going to be reading from some selections from a book called The 10 Global Trends. And this is a great book because it emphasizes and supports the idea that we are in a benevolent universe, a universe in which things can be known with certainty and that success is to be expected. Now, we all know this. Everybody on the planet knows that it's a benevolent universe. We know by the evidence of our senses and the use of our mind. There's some of us that want to pretend otherwise. They want to pretend that the universe is exactly opposite. It's scary, it's unknowable, and failure is to be expected. So when you get that kind of crap from, say, your socialist neighbor, you can either quote the statistics from this book or you can just simply refer them to it and say, there's a book called The 10 Global Trends. Read it and you'll find out the truth. So we'll start with trend number 1. It's called the Great Enrichment. Since 1820, the size of the world's economy has grown more than 100-fold. Over the past 200 years, the world population grew somewhat less than 8-fold. Measuring the size of the economy over time is challenging, however. One commonly used measure is the 2011 constant international dollar, which is a hypothetical unit of currency that has the same purchasing power parity value that the U.S. dollar had in the United States at a given point in time. Excuse me. Economic growth figures are adjusted to reflect the local prices of products to give a better idea of the purchasing power of individuals in different countries over time. Between 1500 and 1820, the world gross product grew about 0.3% per year, eventually tripling from 430 billion to 1.2 trillion. As some countries began adopting freer markets and the rule of law spread with increased international trade, the pace of global economic growth sped up to 1.3% annually, increasing the size of the world economy to 3.4 trillion in 1900. Since that time, global economic growth has averaged slightly more than 3% per year, boosting world gross product to more than 121 trillion by 2018. What about the future? The IPCC benchmark middle-of-the-road scenario, which features medium levels of economic and population growth, projects that the global economy will grow to about 600 trillion by 2100. The IPCC expects that the global economic growth rate will average about 2% annually in that scenario. If, however, global economic growth were to maintain its 2.8% average rate since 2000, the world's economy would instead increase by almost tenfold to 1.1 quadrillion by 2100. And that's the Great Enrichment, meaning that the planet is getting richer and richer and getting richer and richer at a faster rate. Trend number 2, the end of poverty. The vast majority of our ancestors lived and died in humanity's natural state of disease-ridden abject poverty and pervasive ignorance. University of Paris economists estimate that as late as 1820, nearly 84% of the world's population lived in extreme poverty. Then we have what an economist calls the Great Enrichment, and the poverty began to slowly decline. 66% in 1910, 55% by 1950. According to the World Bank, 42% of the globe's population was living in absolute poverty in 81. In other words, it took 160 years for the rate of extreme poverty to fall by half. Fortunately, the pace of global poverty reduction has greatly sped up. The latest World Bank assessment reckons that the share of the world's inhabitants living in extreme poverty fell to 8.6% in 2018. In 1990, about 1.9 billion of the world's population lived in extreme poverty. By 2018, that number had dropped to 650 million, even despite ongoing population increases that put world population at 7.5 billion. Maintaining the current rate of poverty reduction would result in less than 5% of the world's population living in destitution in 2030. And in 2015, the United Nations set the goal of eradicating extreme poverty by 2030 for all people everywhere. It might even be attainable. And that trend is the end of poverty, which makes sense. If the world is getting richer, then you would naturally assume that poverty is lessening its grip. Trend number 3, are we running out of resources? In his 1968 book, The Population Bomb, Stanford University biologist Paul Ehrlich warned that the overpopulation, overconsumption would result in the exhaustion of resources and a global catastrophe. To understand whether or not that's likely to happen, it's important to recognize that resources are not finite in the same way that a slice of pizza is finite. That's because the totality of our resources is neither known nor fixed. In a competitive economy, humanity's knowledge about the value and availability of something tends to be reflected in its price. If prices fall, resources can be deemed to have been more abundant relative to demand. If prices increase, they can deem to have become less abundant, again, relative to demand. Higher prices also create incentives for innovation, including discoveries of new deposits, greater efficiency of use, and the development of substitutes. In a recent paper, one of us looked at prices for 50 foundational commodities covering energy, food, materials, and metals. And the data was collected by the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund between 1980 and 2017. The paper found that the nominal prices of 9 commodities fell, and he goes on some more details. But the bottom line is on the average, the real price of 50 commodities fell by 36.3%. In fact, resources tend to become more abundant over time relative to the demand for them. So, are we running out of resources? The answer is no. We have an abundance of resources. Trend 4, peak population. World population will likely peak at 9.8 billion at around 2080 and fall to 9.5 by 2100 in the medium fertility scenario calculated by a demographer and his colleagues at the International Institute for Applied Systems Analysis. Alternatively, assuming rapid economic growth, technological advancement, and rising levels of education attainment for both sexes, all factors that tend to lower fertility, Lutz projects that world population will more likely peak at about 8.9 billion by 2060 and decline to 7.8 by the end of the 21st century. Today, global population stands at about 7.7 billion. These projections contrast with the United Nations median population projection, which reckons there's a good chance that the world population will peak at 10.9 billion before 2100. Lutz and his fellow researchers point out that the past UN projections have been too high. That has been the case, they argue, because the UN does not take adequate account of the effects on fertility of increased levels of education, especially the schooling of girls and women. Other global trends, such as steeply falling child mortality rates, increased urbanization, rising incomes, and the spread of political and economic freedom, all strongly correlate with families choosing to have fewer children. Instead of having many children in the hope that a few might survive, more parents around the world now aim at providing those few whom they do have with the skills and social capital that will enable them to flourish in a modern economy. The trend toward lower population growth is good news because it means that the global expansion of reproductive freedom is empowering more families to decide how many children they wish to have. So that the global population isn't going to explode, as Paul Ehrlich and other people have said in the past. It's going to level out. As the richer we get, the more resources that we have, the more abundance that we enjoy, people have a tendency to have fewer children. Usually, like they said in this particular trend, is that when you're poor and you don't have maybe access to adequate health care, and so you may have more children dying. And so when you're wealthier and you have more access to health care, more your children are going to go ahead and survive, so you don't need to overdo it, so to speak. So in other words, some people might go out and try to have as many kids as they possibly can, not knowing how many are going to survive. But when you're wealthier, you know that the kids are more likely than not to survive, so you just have, say, 2 children. So that's that. as far as the children are concerned. So, back in a minute. Thank you. I'm going to read one more trend 5, the end of famine, and then we'll go ahead and take a quick break and then go ahead and play a clip from the John and Ken Show. Trend 5, the end of famine. Adequate nutrition is a basic requirement for human survival. Yet, for most of history, food was always scarce. The prevalence of food shortages can be gleaned from the profusion of commonly used idioms, such as feast today, famine tomorrow, from fairy tales such as Hansel and Gretel, and from scriptural references such as the biblical 4 horsemen of the apocalypse, in which famine accompanies pestilence, war, and death. In fact, the great famine of all time occurred between 1958 and 1962, when the Chinese communist ruler Mao Zedong used brute force to nationalize the country's farmland, causing up to 45 million deaths in the process. That's just staggering. 45 million dead because of one guy. Since 1961, the global average population weighted food supply per person per day rose from 2,196 calories to 2,962 calories in 2017. To put these figures in perspective, the U.S. Department of Agriculture recommends that moderately active adult men consume between 2,200 and 2,800 calories a day, and moderately active women consume between 1,800 and 2,000 calories a day. In sub-Saharan Africa, the average food supply per person per day rose from approximately 1,800 calories in 1961 to 2,449 calories in 2017. Put differently, the world's poorest region enjoys access to food that is roughly equivalent to that of the Portuguese in the 1960s. What accounts for the growing access to food? First, agricultural productivity has greatly improved because of more scientific methods of farming, access to plentiful and much improved fertilizers and pesticides, and new yield and disease-resistant plants. Let me interject something here. This is where, again, the left they're just absolutely fascinated with death. I think sometimes their goal is just to have everybody die. That's their real idea of paradise. We'll have global paradise when every man, woman, and child on this planet is dead. Because all what he's just said there, the left is against. Agricultural productivity is greatly improved because of more scientific methods of farming. And that includes what? GMOs, genetically modified organisms, and which the left hates. Access to plentiful and much improved fertilizers and pesticides, which the left is busy trying to get rid of, trying to rid the planet of. And when you're doing that, all you end up doing is starving people to death. And you have to let your lefty friends and buddies know about this. Your neighbor across the fence, fertilizers and pesticides and GMO, you are pro-death, MFer. That's what you need to tell that clown. You're pro-death. All you want to do is see more and more people on this planet die, and die in long, drawn-out, hideous ways. Okay, back to the book. Second, the world has grown much richer, and people can afford to buy more food, thus stimulating its production. Third, the spread of democracy and the free press ensures that governments are more accountable and human rights abuses widely reported. Fourth, improved transport and communications allow countries with bountiful harvests to sell or donate their agricultural surpluses to countries suffering from food shortages. In his 1968 book, The Population Bomb, Paul Ehrlich from Stanford wrote, quote, "The battle to feed all of humanity is over. In the 1970s, hundreds of millions of people will starve to death in spite of any crash programs embarked upon now," unquote. That year, the food supply in 34 out of 152 countries surveyed amounted to fewer than 2,000 calories per person per day. That was true of only 2 out of 173 countries surveyed in 2017. Today, famines have all but disappeared outside war zone. That's the first 5 trends from a book called 10 Global Trends. Buy the book. You don't have to memorize everything, but you can either show it to your lefty friends or quote it, or you can also just refer it to them. Say, hey, you're full of crap, and if you want to understand how you're full of crap, here's the book that explains how you're full of crap. It's a benevolent universe. Success is to be expected, and don't let anyone tell you otherwise. Back in a minute. Thank you. So now I'm going to go ahead and play a clip from, was it yesterday? I don't know, yesterday, day before, the John and Ken show. Matter of fact, it was yesterday. So, and they're talking about unions here in Southern California and their contribution to how things have gotten really screwed up in this state, and particularly in Southern California. And then I'm going to have some comments afterwards.
Department and Bank of America being told by a judge they can't automatically just freeze people's accounts with their fraud filter. The newly elected president of California state government's largest public employee union. We talked about this guy last week. His name is Richard Lewis Brown. He doesn't take office till the end of the month. He's president-elect of SEIU Local 1000. But he says he's going to try to block the $1 million the union wants to give to Newsom to fight the recall. Isn't that great? And of course, as we told you, the reasons are he's bitter, and so are a lot of the union members, because Newsom blocked their raise last year. And he says they even took pay cuts. And he promised that he would undo it and didn't quickly undo it.
So why is that? Why did that union offer $1 million to fight the recall if they got screwed over? I guess the old president was okay with it.
I guess it's just what they do, you know. They're used to just supporting Democratic politicians, and somebody probably asked them, and since it's automatic that they do that, they just thought, because he says they're considering the $1 million contribution. I don't think it's been authorized yet. But he says he's going to hold an emergency board of directors meeting where they plan to talk about their support for Newsom. And he believes that that's where they're considering the $1 million towards Newsom's campaign. And I guess he's going to go to that meeting and try to get him to back off on that idea. This is the guy that basically said he'd like to run Newsom's ass out of town.
Yeah.
That was one of his promises.
We should get this guy on.
They represent 96,000 public sector employees in 9 bargaining units across the state.
No, they're only one piece of the massive government worker union monolith that sucks so much money out of the state.
Oh, in fact, there's another story from the Associated Press that all the rest of the unions are ready to step forward and support Newsom against the recall.
And all they're interested in is getting their fat contracts from Newsom. I mean, I bet you not one of them, right? If we had to question, could get 6 of the leaders here in the studio and question them about the way Newsom handled any number of things. None of them could defend Newsom. None of them. They're just in it for the bribe money. And Newsom is in it for the kickback. It's a virtuous financial circle. They give the union dues money to Newsom's political campaign. Newsom, in return, makes sure that they get their raises. And around it goes. Yeah. All using other people's money.
Yeah, see, the bigger monster here is called SEIU California. The one we're talking about is just a part of the bigger organization, and they're strongly backing Newsom. They put out a statement. This is this old hack, Bob Schoonover, SEIU California president. I remember talking about that guy for years. But, you know, in a way, you can't blame them. My problem is we should not have public employee unions. They shouldn't exist because their very nature is to back a politician, donate heavily to his campaign, bring out the vote, and then come back and say, give us our pay raise and our benefits raise.
Huge conflict of interest.
We gave you a lot. Of course it is. You know, that doesn't exist in most union management relationships.
This was a gift from Jerry Brown.
In the world of public employment, it does exist.
Jerry
If I was the head of the Supreme Court, I'd declare these things illegal and disband them all. Thank you.
So there you go. They understand, just like everybody else should understand. I think everybody else does understand. People just don't generally talk about it. That public employee unions are a conflict of interest. The essence of corruption is conflict of interest. Therefore, public employee unions are corrupt, inherently corrupt, irreversibly corrupt, and irredeemably corrupt, and they've got to go. It's like Ken was saying. He said, if I was in the Supreme Court, I'd just ban them outright. But it's going to be up to you and I to go to our representatives, or the fools that think of themselves as leaders, but go to our representatives and demand that public employee unions be decertified. That's the process. Decertify those unions now. There's nothing good that's coming from them. You want to know why we have very aggressive police officers and they're involved in shootings all the time? It's thanks to their damn unions. The damn unions go out there and wind them up and tell them literally, your job is to come home to your family every day. Now, you're wearing, and they not only have done that, the police officers used to wear a .38. That was the gun that they had with them, a .38. Now they're carrying a 9mm, so a larger cartridge. And they are also wearing every damn one of them. I'm surprised they don't even do this with the clerks. Every damn one of them wears a bulletproof vest. They're dressed for combat. They're not dressed for policing. They're dressed for combat. And so then they're surprised and stunned when they get a combat-like response from people that they're going to pull over that might normally be cooperative are uncooperative. The people that might likely be provide low levels of resistance are now providing maximum levels of resistance, putting the police in a position where now they have to draw their weapons and they have to fire on people more and more frequently. And again, have to have more and more aggressive behavior. The gentleman in, I think it was Minnesota, they got shot in the back 7 times because he was resisting a warrant. And along with this union mentality comes the idea that, the false idea that government has rights. Because that's what that police officer is saying loud and clear when he shoots somebody in the back, is that the government has the right to serve that warrant. No such thing. Government has no rights. Okay, that's it. If you learn nothing else from today's broadcast, learn that. Government has no rights. So, when they come out and say, oh, but I have the right to unionize. No, you damn well don't. Not as a public employee. If you want to unionize, that's important to you. Go out in the private industry and go find a place that's unionized, or agitate for a union to your heart's content. But as far as the government is concerned, no individual in government, and the government writ large, has rights. The individuals have no extra rights, and the government has no rights. The other part of what makes this, let's look at policing again. So you have the aggressive behavior, number one. Number two, the unions have gone out to the legislatures and have gotten laws written that make the police officers, in essence, super citizens. Okay, the police officers are not held to the same standard, or even say a higher standard, but they're held to a lower standard when it comes to killings. When a police officer kills somebody, usually it's going to be a shooting. The police officer, all he has to do is get on the stand, swear to the jury that he feared for his life, and the jury must find him not guilty. That's the law. You and I are held to a different standard, a higher standard. It's called the reasonable man standard. And so we would have to go to and tell the jury, yes, I was defending myself, I was in fear for my life, and then the jury would have to decide whether or not, not only whether or not we're lying, but whether or not our fear was rational, reasonable, justified. Okay, so that's why there's a huge sense of injustice here. We all know that if I went out and shot somebody in the back 7 times, I'd be thrown into prison so fast it'd make your head spin. Okay, because there's no way I could come out and say, oh, but he was, even though he was walking away from me, I feared for my life. No. And then the police officer in North Carolina that shot a man in the back, it was videotaped. Shooting a guy and killing him, and then dropping a weapon to make it look as though this poor guy was threatening him. Right? So, what happened in that situation? Well, yes, the guy was fired immediately. Yes, he was arrested immediately. Yes, he was put on trial for murder immediately. And the trial ended in a hung jury. And you got to be thinking, you're kidding me. How can that be? How can it be? Simple, because of that law I just told you about. He goes on the stand and he says, I swear, up and down that I feared for my safety. And the jury has no choice but to go ahead and find him not guilty. Now, half or a certain portion of the jurors thought, obviously, no, I'm not going to do that. I know what I see here, and this is murder, and went for murder. But enough of the jurors said, well, I guess I just got to go along with the law. So that kind of a law has to be struck down. And you're only going to get it struck down when you decertify the unions. They're self-serving, they're inherently corrupt, and they got to go. Another example with the fire department. See, everybody likes to also lionize these folks. Sean Hannity does us no favors by licking the bottoms of the police department and the fire department. Oh, our heroes. Bullshit. They're out for themselves. The fire department is the same way. When you go out and you call for a fire truck, let's say in one particular case, I saw a dumpster fire. Right? So see this dumpster fire, call 911. Hey, we got a dumpster fire that's going pretty good at such and such address. And it took 15, 20 minutes before I heard the first sirens. And I thought, this is ridiculous. I'm not out in the sticks somewhere. I'm in Pasadena, California. They've got all kinds of fire stations around here. And I found out later from a fire department person that the reason there's a delay is that the fire trucks won't even roll until they've gotten two reports of the fire. Okay, so, I had another incident, again in Pasadena, where I had a vehicle that caught fire. My vehicle caught fire, and it ended up being a total loss because the fire department, again, refused to roll. And this is because my vehicle's on fire. It's like 5 o'clock in the morning. Who's going to see my vehicle, who's awake at that time? Because it's parked out on the street. Who's awake? So again, it took extra long time for the trucks to get there. By the time they got there, it was too late. It was fully involved, and it was a total loss. And so that's the fire departments for you. Everything with the unions is about money. Everywhere they can cut corners, they can cut costs, they're going to do it. Fobbing the work off on somebody else, etc. It's corrupt, and it's got to go. And again, John and Ken understand that. They know that. I know that. And now you know that. So, and that's the John and Ken show. They come on 2 o'clock in the afternoon to 6 o'clock p.m. Monday through Friday in Southern California on AM 640. And well worth listening to for the most part. Excuse me there. Well worth listening to for the most part, because again, they're actually, these are guys that I refer to as true conservatives because of the way they communicate. They don't qualify everything. A lot of conservative commentators qualify, in my opinion. It's kind of like an excuse me or apologizing for what they're going to say. John and Ken don't apologize for anything. They know what they see. They know right, they know wrong, and they come out and say so. So, back in a minute. Thank you, thank you. That brings me to the end of another episode of The Drill. And so remember to be honest, be smart, be beautiful, and remember that the left has no authority, they have no power, and they can't win.